Okay, so I have a theory about weddings, and I just want to say it's not like scientifically rigorous. It's just based off my observations over the years, which is problems that show up during the wedding are basically the problems that show up during the marriage. And it essentially folds into that idea that I've been talking about, which is that you get four shocks, four warnings. You can see the pattern that then becomes larger and indicative of what's going to occur. So, for example, if you have overbearing in laws on one side, who essentially tries to take over the wedding, is trying to make it about themselves, is essentially trying to honor themselves. It's not about the bride and groom. And in fact, low key, there's some passive aggression and contempt toward either the bride or the groom. That shows up. That shows up in the marriage, especially when you have children in the mix. Um, it's essentially that this stress fracture point of a system, of a relationship, it exists, and the more you load onto that point, the more the consequences and the impacts are going to be seen. So it could also be like maybe you have one person who is not involved in the wedding planning process at all. This person just basically says, "Oh, I want to do what you want to do," or I don't have an opinion. You care about this more." And essentially they're not doing anything. They don't think that they need to or that it's any kind of part of their job. They're not invested. You see this in the marriage. So it either may be an inability or lack of decision making, or it could literally just be I'm putting everything on you that I don't think is my job. Or you could have a very controlling spouse or, fiance or fiance. Anyway, you could have a very controlling person that you're about to marry who is controlling the wedding and making all of the decisions. And anytime you make a suggestion or say something that you would like to do, it gets shot down. This other person might have a vision. Okay, the vision apparently does not include both people participating in the wedding planning process. It only includes themselves. You're only going to do what they want to do. And so you see these controlling behaviors, even if that person has justified it to themselves. you know, Sometimes you see this around issues of taste, where one person wants to do something that is not tasteful and the other person is aware that it's not tasteful, or maybe just have a different aesthetic opinion, right? So that shows up in the marriage. I did a video with my son the other day where we were talking about how to maintain respect in a parent child dynamic where, let's say, the child starts to become smarter than the parent, know more than the parent, outstrip the parent and their intellectual capacities. And I posit that you do not need to be a smart parent, that you do not need to be smarter than your child or equally as intelligent to be respected as a parent. And the same is true in a relationship dynamic. You do not have to have the same capacities in order to be respected in the marriage. However, sometimes you have people pull a Mr. and Mrs. Bennett from Pride and Prejudice. He married somebody that he didn't respect, but he found hot or beautiful, whatever. And then as they get into the marriage, he starts to respect her less and less because of how she responds to things, how she handles things, how she handles herself, right? He was shallow and then started to have contempt for her. And from that contempt, basically is mistreating her and shit talking her to the daughters. Now, is he wrong? He's not wrong. That's not the point, my guy. The point is you chose this person, right? So, if you marry somebody and you marry them for like their money, their looks, or maybe you're both in a period of your life where everything seems to mesh really well, really intensely, but it's all exterior factors that are not intrinsic to you two as a human being. So let's say two actors on a movie set, right? You're on the movie set, you're essentially a created almost family unit for it could be something like 6 months. And so you spend so much time with this person, and it appears that you have a lot in common. But once the movie is done, or once you have to maintain the relationship when you don't have that level of interconnectedness, the relationship falls apart. So there could be many different reasons why people lose respect for each other in the marriage. Kids is a big one. Um, shared resources. So like if you're living in a home together, if you have one person who is taking on all of the labor, they're going to be resentful. Um, and the reason they've taken on all the labor is the other person doesn't respect the labor and feels perfectly fine to put it on the other person, or they may not respect that other person. And then the person who's in the position of not being respected and not supported and not having an actual partner, they start to resent and then not respect the other person, and you lose respect. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying we're looking at the dynamic and explaining like how this happens. So these types of situations are absolutely great foundations to end up in an abuse dynamic one way or the other. And so I have a friend who just got married, and they had a wedding with some significant issues. And that's the thing about being a smart person. Sometimes you pattern recognize, you're like, I got to keep it to myself. You know what I mean? The smarter you are, if you are intelligent without compassion, if you are intelligent without recognizing other people as equally worthy, as my son said, human beings who are allowed to be themselves and to have ideas and opinions, even if it's wrong. You know what I'm saying? That you can veer very quickly into intellectual arrogance and then abusive behaviors, becoming an abuser. So sometimes, a smart person needs to keep it to themselves. And it's not our place to come in and try to fix people or make people better. And it's what I see a lot when it comes to smart abusers is they feel that they're entitled to do this. Now, when you have an abuser with less intellectual capacity, they might just be like, I want what I want, and because I said so, and coming up with reasons that you can argue with, but just make them mad, and then they get physical. So not all abusers are smart. You can abuse at any level of intellectual capacity. The problem with the smart abusers, however, is that they are great at coming up with justifications for their behavior and why the other person deserves it. So when I was like writing the message that I wanted to put in my thing to my friend, I wanted to emphasize respect because I could see a situation where we're moving toward disrespect, where one person is not doing things they should be doing as a partner in the relationship, and the other person loses respect because that person is not as capable and not as invested as they are in doing those things. So I essentially wrote, I was going to read it, but I don't think that I will. But I essentially wrote about how love should be the fruit of the respect and cherishing of the other person. And low key, everybody should be involved in doing things in the marriage, but more elegantly written. I just I've been lucky to have multiple experiences where I've directly seen incredible married couples. Like my foster parents were an incredible partnership. And I recently had clients who she was in a wreck. She was on her way home from somewhere, and it was like a weekend day, so not like a rush. And she has the light, she's making the turn. She gets plowed into by a dude going 115 miles an hour trying to escape and evade the police. This was a whole on police chase, and she just massive brain damage, but not brain damage to the point where she's on a machine where she can't breathe on her own. So it's a very tough situation. And watching him, they'd been married for 40 years. They're both in their mid 60s. And the way this man cared for her, showed up for her, was caring for her and taking ownership of that care, making sure that the nurses were there, and he himself doing things. He didn't lose respect for his wife. She was still his wife, even though she was incapacitated. He still was loving her. And even if she wasn't able to be a partner in the way that you would expect in a marriage, he still respected all of the things that she had done up until that point. He saw her as a person. He cherished her, and he treated her the way he would want to be treated in that situation. And there was a lot of care and love in how he talked about her, how he talked to her. It's one of the most moving things I've ever seen. And I unfortunately don't think it's as common as it should be. Anyway, when we're talking about these types of respect, I like to use Barrett Brogard's approach to it. So her approaches to respect are Kantian respect, which is respect owed equally to all human beings. Then there's respect as deep admiration. The respect as politeness or civility. So we're polite in society. We are respecting our society, even if we don't know this particular person, and respect that person. But we're respecting the culture in which we live. And so being respectful to other people fosters that. Then there's deference respect, the one abusers always mean when they use the word respect, which is behaving as if someone is in a position of authority over you and giving or acknowledging someone else's authority over you. Then there's apprehensive respect, which is the kind of respect you have for something dangerous, which also could be the abusive kind of respect, but she means it in terms of like the ocean or a hurricane, something very powerful and potentially scary that you need to respect, but not because it's bad, I guess. Anyway, so when we're talking about types of respect, we're also talking about types of interconnectedness. When you have one person completely dependent on another, and it's not their fault, like with the example of my clients, being able to respect them as a human being, even though they are not able to embody really any human being other than existing. Or if you have someone who is not contributing to the marriage, not contributing to the partnership, not being a partner, you're going to lose respect there because they are taking advantage of the other person. And so the way respect shows up in these relationships, even friendships, parent-child dynamic, the people who should respect the other person aren't, and the person who is respecting the other person when they shouldn't is often a dynamic that you see. But we want to think about like what are the kinds of respect that we show each other, and whether we're appropriately showing respect. Because sometimes you shouldn't respect somebody. Sometimes they have done things that are not okay, and you should lose respect, and that should impact how you feel about them. They are not your partner. They're not treating you as a partner. So if the respect is present, how is it present? If the respect is not present, why isn't it present? How should it be showing up if there should be respect? Anyway, I hope this makes sense, and I'll talk to you next time.